So if you've ever replaced your J-pipe, then you know exactly how difficult that entire procedure can be. In addition to trying to remove the 14mm nuts that are holding in the J-pipe to the turbo, you also have the turbo brackets. So what I have here is the Turbo Support Bracket kit for the 2015 Plus WRX. Big shout out to Perrin for sending me this. I pulled it up on Perrin's site. At times, when you try to install an aftermarket J-pipe, the OEM bracket right there doesn't align with the block. And so this is supposed to help with the reinstallation and removal if necessary for the J-pipes. And also a lot of folks just decided not to reinstall the brackets, the OEM brackets, just because they're so difficult to line up and everything. So I know a lot of folks have been running it without one, and this should be the solution for it. So I know what you're thinking, you already have it installed, why do you need this? Trust me, I have those same thoughts as well. I am not looking forward to this install just because it is so difficult to remove those 14mm nuts on the J-pipe, and there's just not enough room there, and I'm pretty sure they're burnt off. But luckily, I already have the bumper off, and I took my skid plate off just because I was in the middle of working on something on the car. So it'd be a perfect time to try and get this thing installed. It's not gonna be easy, but we'll just have to see. So I'm gonna try to go step by step just because I haven't really seen any installation videos regarding this. Please follow along. If you have any questions after the video, then leave them in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. So let's get started. And I'm just gonna follow along with Perrin's instructions. I guess they have a couple sets of instructions for the OEM J-pipe versus an aftermarket J-pipe. I have an aftermarket J-pipe, so I am gonna be following this set. Let's get started. So just to give you guys a better visual, I am on the driver's side under the car where the J-pipe is. This is your J-pipe, and this is the turbo section right here. And what this kit is supposed to do, it's supposed to replace that thin piece of metal with the Perrin bracket, like so. And on the back side, it's supposed to replace this piece right here with this, just like so. So first things first, we got to remove the OEM bracket and get these installed. Hopefully these come off easy. I was concerned about these two right here. This OEM bracket is one piece and it goes from here all the way to the other side of the J-pipe, the back side of it. You'll need to remove this bolt right here as well as this 14mm. So at the end of it, you're gonna take this one bracket and replace it with the two individual ones I just showed you. And that should be it. Like I said, my main concern is these two bolts right here, just because it was so hard to get off from the factory, you know, when I replaced the J-pipe. But yeah, pretty much you can get access from the top. Here, I'll show you. All right, so looking at it from the top of the engine bay, the first step is to remove this 14mm bolt right here. And you can access it from the top of the engine bay. And after you get that 14mm removed, you want to go ahead and loosen these two. And looking at it from the bottom of the car, this is the 14mm nut that you want to remove. And after that, you want to loosen these two 12mm nuts just to the left of it. It's a little hard to see, but it's right there. For this step, the goal is to remove this heat shield right here, this entire thing. And so back up to the top here, there's one more bolt that's holding on the heat shield, and this is a 12mm bolt right there. You want to remove that bolt, and then we'll move on to the next step. So now you should be able to remove the heat shield after you remove those bolts. And you can simply just slide it out, and there we go. So after you remove the heat shield, the next thing you want to do is to remove this 16mm bolt holding in the turbo support bracket, and it's this one right here. In the moment of truth, so after you remove that 16mm bolt, I'm gonna go ahead and remove the two 14mm nuts holding in the J-pipe to the turbo. And there's gonna be one on each side. Here's the back And just over here, right there, is the front. And be very patient with this step. If you need to, use some penetrating oil like PB Blaster to assist with removing these nuts, just because I guarantee you they are caked on there. But I'm gonna go ahead and try with my breaker bar and see what I can do. First one came out surprisingly with no issues. Let's go and get the next one out. So after you remove the two 14mm nuts, you can go ahead and remove the turbo bracket. And you can now get rid of this piece just because we'll no longer be using it. We're gonna start with the installation of the rear turbo support bracket. And the piece that you want should be this one right here, the bigger one out of the two. And we simply just put everything back together the way we took it out. So you wanna start off by using the 14mm nut, just loosely fitting it on there. Just so you can hold it in place. And you take the 16mm bolt we removed, fasten the top side of it loosely. Afterwards, you want to torque them down to 31 foot-pounds. So after you tighten the nut and the bolt, you want to go ahead and move on to the front and reinstall the bracket we removed from the earlier steps. And this was a little confusing just because I was disoriented, but a good marker so you can remember is that this is where the O2 sensor clip goes into, so right there. So from the front, you want to slip it through here, and then you want to use the 12mm nut we removed from the earlier step and bolt it on to this hole. And there we go. Just loosely bolted on here for now. After we get the heat shield loosely fitted on there, last thing to do is to install the front turbo support bracket. And I'll show you how to do that. Just like so. Then you take your 14mm bolt and tighten that on there. Like so. Then you want to get the 14mm nut and loosely put that on the turbo studs. Then you want to torque this nut down to 31 foot-pounds. So after you get those two bolts torqued down, last thing we need to do up above is to torque this 14mm bolt to 31 foot-pounds. Okay, so once you get everything tightened up, remember to put the O2 sensor plug back in. There we go. Okay, so just a recap. I know that was kind of a messy install, and trust me, I hated it. But make sure that you tighten every single bolt that you removed. One is this right here, these two to the engine block, and then there's one more right there where my index finger is. And then we go under the car. Remember to tighten these two 14mm nuts to the J-pipe. Trust me, you cannot forget it, and you won't forget it. There's the other one on this side. And then the 2 brackets, basically all that work that we did was to remove this bracket right here and replace it with these 2 individual ones. So this allows for better adjustability, and you can easily remove the J-pipe in the future if you choose to part out or if you have to part out. But I think this looks great. And again, just make sure, it was a little confusing with the heat shield right here, so just make sure you orient it the correct way, and you can't miss it just because the clip right here and the hole to the clip is on the bottom. I mean, once you rotate it around, you should be able to get it back in place. And again, make sure to tighten all of the bolts, nuts and bolts, this one, this one, this one, and finally the top one, like I mentioned earlier. This bolt right here, just above the nut, was 31 foot-pounds as well. And then same thing with the bolt that is securing the heat shield to the front part of the bracket right here. And if you check out the instructions for the back bracket, it tells you to tighten this first and then loosen this and then tighten this, just back and forth, so that it ensures you have a seal on the turbo and nothing is loose. But I didn't have to do that just because I still had these 2 in place, and so when I took off the nuts to the J-pipe, it didn't wobble or anything, it didn't move. So yeah, I just took it off and basically buttoned it down to 31 foot-pounds each. So just one thing I learned, and I should have read the instructions a little better, but I'm explaining it now. When you get to the front bracket, the first thing you want to do is to torque this down to 31 foot-pounds, and then just kind of line this up accordingly so that you're able to get this bolt through that hole right there. And the reason why you want to torque that nut down first is because you cannot get a torque wrench, or any tool for that matter, just because you have this heat shield right here. So if this is loose, if all of this is loose, that means you can move your heat shield and you can get a tool under here to torque this down. But when you torque it down, just be careful because this tends to rotate, so you're gonna have to just do your best to torque it to 31 foot-pounds. It doesn't have to be accurate, but just to where it's close enough to where it's not gonna fall off. All right guys, we just finished the job. I'm not gonna lie, that was not one of my cleanest installs, but I haven't seen any other videos with this part specifically, and I'm glad to attempt to install it, and successfully, regardless of how messy it was. But please, 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 if you have absolutely any questions, go ahead and reach out to the comments below. I check these comments pretty often, and also you can send me a message on Instagram and I will do my best to help out. Again, if you made it this far throughout the video, thank you so much for watching, and as always, I will see you guys in the next one.